Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. Friends, this week's Parsha is Parashat Beshalach. And friends, there is no other Parsha in all of Torah that depicts God's relationship with Baalei Tshuvas and converts better than this one. As it states in the first parak, how he softens the sun by day and illuminates their paths at night. How careful he is not to burden the people with what they can handle, and even reroutes their journey to keep them faithful. Which proves to us how ridiculous the Christian argument is that the God of the Hebrew Bible is an angry, unloving God, that grace and love only came through Jesus. Perhaps if they spent more time reading Torah than trying to justify the need for their addition, they may get it, friends. But can you blame them? Because honestly, how can they ever justify the need for a new text if the old one depicted the Creator as interested in us as the supposed new one? But this just shows that the problem is not with God, friends. No, God never changed. The problem is with us. Whether if you have accepted Christianity or even modern day Kabbalah, by doing so all you have stated was that God hasn't done enough, hasn't spoken enough, he hasn't acted enough. And if you're feeling like this, then it'll probably never be enough for you. No matter the miracles or the ethical lessons, what you want, friends, is Pharaoh ordering you what to think and how to act. When the signature of a true teacher has never been to make you rely on him, but to make you ethically independent so that you'd be able to teach others and multiply his initial efforts. Which is clearly even seen in the Jewish world today when some yell the phrase Mashiach now. All they're really asking for is some heavenly bailout. In other words, they don't want Mashiach, but they want Pharaoh. Which is why when the Israelites were begging Shmuel Navi for a king to rule over them, he told them, you don't want a king, you don't need a king, God will be your king. In other words, you have an example, you have instructions, what more do you need? And this is just what we see in this week's Parsha. The first instance of ingratitude. After all the miracles and all the love. In the second parak, the Hebrews cry to Moses, did you bring us out of Egypt to bury us here? And they said the phrase, which is the most counterproductive to virtually everything we've read so far. And what's that, friends? That it would have been better to serve evil than to die. And Moses must have remembered every time he put his life on the line in order to do good, the stories of how his father Abraham put his life on the line for the sake of ethical monotheism. How nothing would have ever progressed if his fathers would have feared death. That's why Chazal bring down that one must forfeit his or her life rather than worship idols or foreign gods. Why? Because of the commandment to love him with your whole nefesh. A love that these three parshas should have instilled in us, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Actually, we can almost discern God's will for us in this parsha by doing the exact opposite of what we see the Hebrews doing, to the point that we see a new reaction from the Almighty in this parsha. And what's that, friends? Frustration. We see Moses trying to comfort people, telling them to trust in God and be still, not directly speaking to the Almighty, but the Almighty steps in and states, why are you crying to me? Show some fortitude, show some dignity, because they had it when they left, when the Egyptians were handing over their possessions, to the point that in the beginning of the Parsha it shows that the Israelites were so inspired and built up for God that it even states that they left Egypt armed and ready for battle. In other words, if the Hebrews would have fought, the Hebrews would have won. So stop crying to me. Stretch out your hand and just cause another miracle to happen. Show no resilience. What's this teaching us, friends? Friends, the Israelites were literally walking in the ways of God. I mean, literally, because they didn't know where they were going in the desert. And friends, this story isn't here by accident, but rather it's here to show us that even when you're walking in the paths of God, we shouldn't be scared to throw down, because God didn't bring us this far for us to chicken out. And if he doesn't intercede, then let us die before groveling, because faith is not faith unless doubt exists. And it's this maneuverability that builds your character, because the reason to learn to walk in the ways of God is to be able to grow and not to completely depend on him for everything, but to cultivate a new spirit, a fighting spirit, to ultimately be strong and brave enough to take his ethical message to the world. Like a parent whose sole reason for instructing and protecting their child is not that the child should always rely on them, but so that they can instruct and impart their parents' values to the rest of the world, which is kind of ridiculous how even today ethnic Jews are most recognized for their kvetching. What a disgusting, weak trait. Haven't we learned anything from these parshas? So the ideal Jew is not Woody Allen, but David HaMelech, a man's man, a man of the book and a man of the sword. If not, what's the point of any of these parshas if not individual moral training? That's where the meat is, my friends. Not this silly mysticism taught nowadays that makes people not even want to work or even support their families because they're trusting in God. Not in this world, my friends, which is why this is what we see the Almighty doing countless times in this parsha, testing, training the Hebrews so that they can learn to follow directions. Why? Because repairing the world, my friends, is a team effort. There has to be order. And here in this parsha, we see that the Israelites can't even follow the simple instructions on how to gather the manna, which leads us to the main reason God appointed the Jewish people to be his representatives to the world, which is not because they were so impressive, but because of the promise he made to Abraham. And my friends, he keeps those promises. And what's that promise? That through him, through his descendants, that all the nations of the world would be blessed, which is why I dislike when rabbis try to rewrite the text to try to make the Israelites always look innocent. Friends, the power is in the truth. The truth, plain, simple meaning of the text. That if God can use them, he can use you also. And if he can help them, he can help you. Which is why Chazal have used this week's Parsha to lay out the standards on how to treat both converts and returnees to Judaism for ages to come. And honestly, what other biblical story could they have used to describe God's concern for man or what they may have done in the past? And perhaps you had a different experience when you tried to attach yourself to God. Perhaps you weren't treated like Israel in Egypt, but rather like Ruth with Naomi. In other words, you were mistreated. Now, many would say that this is the halacha. We're supposed to be like Naomi, turning away converts 3 times, and only if they fight, kick, and scream are we to accept them. And friends, many don't even do that. Is this true, friends? Is this the halacha? No, friends, it isn't. And not only is not the halacha, according to Hilchos Tshuva of the Rambam, anyone who behaves in such a manner with someone coming to God, not even his tshuva would be accepted by the Almighty, and he would lose his share in the world to come. Why? Because they placed a stumbling block between God and man, which would easily place virtually every rabbi today in that bunch. And really, what was wrong with what Naomi did? Nothing, actually. If you read the story, which I presume most who have taken such a cruel attitude toward newcomers to Judaism have not, they would have known that in the story of Ruth, they're suffering through a famine. But Naomi gets word that the famine has ended in Judah, so she obviously presumes that the only reason her daughter-in-laws want to join Israel is not because of the God of Israel, but because of the physical benefit. That's why she tells them, "Why do you want to join me? I am too old to have any more sons. Go back to your people." Now, we see that this argument is enough to dissuade Bilpah, but not Ruth. But Ruth, being determined, tells Naomi why she wants to join in the famous statement that she wants her people and her God to also be hers, which is why virtually every code of halacha has never understood this as the way to treat potential converts, but only the way you treat someone who you suspect has an ulterior motive. Because in the story, the relationship that Naomi had with her daughter-in-laws was till then a relationship out of convenience and necessity, as it states that even the famine killed her sons. So she was certain that the only reason they wanted to accompany her was because of the food and not because of God. In other words, if from the outset Ruth would have said, "I want to join the people of Israel because I want to live Torah," there would have not been any type of dissuasion. As a matter of fact, we actually see that Naomi was walking both Ruth and Bilpah to the road towards Jerusalem and then started questioning them. Why did she take them closer to Israel? Because clearly she wanted nothing more than for her daughters to choose the right path. And friends, this is exactly the way the Halakha explains it, and even the way that we see that Parshas Vayera, Bo, Beshalach describe it. That we have God himself reaching in the lives of the disconnected Israelites and drawing them to him. And as we see in the narrative, that even though we see God reaching out, he didn't accept anyone unless they were willing to follow wholeheartedly and obediently. To the point that in the same parsha, we have the Israelites telling Moses, "We told you to leave us alone, to let us serve Pharaoh." But clearly Moses did not listen to them, but pursued and kept drawing them to God, which is why the rabbis have always said that from these parshas we learn how to treat converts, which is why, according to Halacha, we tell a potential convert, "Why did you choose to convert? Don't you know that that in the present era the Jews are afflicted, crushed, subjugated, strained, and suffering comes upon them? If he answers, I know, would it be that I'd be able to be a part of them? We accept him immediately. And we also see that the Almighty first gave Israel light commandments like believing in Moses, and then heavier ones like getting rid of their chametz and smearing the lamb's blood on their doorposts, because the Almighty didn't demand too much of them lest they fall away. Even like we said in the beginning of the parsha, that it states that the Almighty led them a different way in the desert, lest that because of their panicking, they turn from the good path to the bad path, which is why the halacha states further that we inform him of the fundamentals of the faith, the unity of God, and the prohibition against the worship of false deities. We elaborate on this matter, and we inform him of the punishment given for violating the mitzvahs. However, we do not teach him all the particulars, lest it cause him to turn away from the good path to the bad path. For at the outset, we draw a person forth with soft and appealing words, as it states in Hosea 11:4, with cords of man I drew them forth out of Egypt, and then continues with bonds of love. And again, friends, here in Hosea 11:4 it states that this is how the Almighty drew Israel out of Egypt, and it's the same verse used by the halacha to describe how we are to treat converts and bring them out of their old life into their new one. And you're probably asking, where does the book of Ruth come in? Well, halacha does mention Ruth, but like we stated earlier, only with how you treat someone who you assume to be insincere. As it states, for a man we check whether he has focused his attention on a woman. For a woman we check whether she has focused her attention on a Jewish youth. If we find no ulterior motive, we inform them of the heaviness of the yoke of the Torah and the difficulty of the common people having in observing it, so that they will abandon. If they accept and do not abandon their resolve, and thus we see that they are motivated by love and nothing else, we accept them as indicated in Ruth 1:18. And she saw that she was exerting herself to continue with her, and she ceased speaking with her. And again, this explains why Naomi did what she did, because she thought there was an ulterior motive. Now, this only applies when someone approaches you to convert. It's obvious that one should be skeptical, as skeptical as one should be when an ethnic Jew attempts to return. However, this is not the example shown to us in these parshas, which is that when we reach out and cultivate such a love in someone else, that the only thing that matters is that person's belief and will to want to do what's right. In this case, walk in the ways of God, which the Rambam states is an acceptable practice for every Jew to do, to teach Torah to others and draw them to Judaism, which he also states that if we fail to do, we fail to fulfill the mitzvah of loving the Creator. In other words, that the only reason we would ever want to discourage someone is not because we don't want converts, but we don't want insincere Jews calling themselves Jews, both from the non-Jewish world or the ethnic Jewish world. And as you may have noticed, that nowhere in halacha are we instructed to offer the non-Jew interested in converting a different belief system like the Noahide laws, to the point that we tell the non-Jew, know that the world to come is hidden away only for the righteous. They are the Jews. So in other words, this is a standard. Now, this isn't teaching that a righteous Gentile will not have a place in the world to come, but that the world to come is only hidden away for Jews, although non-Jews can still have a share, but clearly only a lesser share. And friends, if you want to learn more about Torah Judaism, please visit bejewish.org. And if you're interested in converting to Judaism, which I encourage you to do, please visit Torah Judaism International at torahjudaism.org. Thank you.